Hi everyone. Hope we will have a great panel discussion today. It's being the last panel. I hope you will enjoy this conversation. The conversation will go around digital MRV or innovative technologies for carbon projects. First of all, thank you very much for Climate Action Reserve and the NACW to organize this interesting panel. Today, we have three very knowledgeable people in this panel. First, I will introduce Christina McCain. Christina McCain is PhD, and she is the Vice President for Product and Partnership at GeoOptics, Inc. She's an expert in climate, land use, and nature-based solutions with decades of experience, and she focuses on deploying GeoOptics emerging satellite-borne 3D SAR or SAR technology to improve the precision, accuracy, and affordability of ecosystem mappings and biomass quantification. So, I believe she will be taking all the questions about SAR technology and explain to us what it is and what it means. Tyler is the CEO and founder, one of the founding members of AgriCapture. AgriCapture is an agtech company advancing in sustainable farming and carbon markets. With background in strategy and partnerships, Tyler leads the AgriCapture leveraging field data to generate high-integrity emissions reductions credits. So welcome, Tyler, and hope you also explain to us how to implement technology in agriculture projects. And last but not least, Benoît Clément. Benoît, he's a climate tech or fintech leader and founder of Quantum Apex. He has a great background, also worked at Vera for many years, and he has always focused on the intersection between technology, financing, and how to enable projects to happen. So welcome, Benoît, and please, your experience is very, we love your experience here as well. So for the panel discussion, we have prepared just 3 questions. The first question will go to all the panelists, and the second question will go first to Tyler and Christina, and then the last question will go to Benoît. We hope to open the question also to the floor at the end so that the panel is more multiple ways discussion. So for the first question, and just to create the environment, so here I have written, more important than starting to discuss about the capabilities of technology, let us start discussing the why and the purpose. At the end, we are creating these information systems to enhance integrity and provide more information to end buyers, customers, and even the general public. From each one of you and of your perspectives, what have been the questions asked, any doubts of the different stakeholders, and how do you address them? And the why is important, and it is important for us to understand why we're implementing these technologies and what are the differences between each one of the technology applications, so that to answer the right questions from the right stakeholders. So please, let's start with Christina.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks. Also, I want to thank CAR and NACW for hosting us here. I am going to make a brief intro / disclaimer, since Juan set me up to be a technical expert on spaceborne SAR. So I actually am a tropical forest ecologist by training. I have been interested involved in supporting and promoting carbon markets since probably before the beginning of my climate career. And I come to this from a very impact-driven perspective rather than a history in the technology of the sector in which I now find myself. So I don't think ever think that I would be sitting here representing a tech startup, certainly not a satellite technology tech startup, but I am happy to answer questions, as many as you can shoot at me, and if not, I will refer them to my colleagues that are developing the technology here. So in terms of why should we have the technology in the space? Why are we engaging in this space? I mean, I guess I would say that we all, as actors or participants or even just voyeurs of the market, right? We all have common interests in those three things in the description of this panel: in scalability, in risk and minimizing risk, and integrity, right? We all have that common interest in a market. And from the supplier or the seller side, if you don't have scalability, you don't have much of a market. If you aren't able to quantify, if not minimize risk, you're not going to have a lot of actors interested in participating in that market. And then if you can't show the integrity of the product in that market, then you don't have trust, and again, you're not going to have many people who are wanting to participate in that market. So that's a very common amongst all the stakeholders in the market interests. And on the seller or the supplier side, and I am going to kind of skew my answers a bit towards the nature-based solutions carbon credits, because that is a really important application of the technology that we're bringing to market and aligns with my background. But if you're on the supply side of carbon credits, you want to have a product that is in demand in the market, right? You're going to invest in producing that product, and you're going to want to have buyers. If you're a buyer in the market, you want to know what it is that you are buying. What are you getting for your money? And so we all have interest in the transparency and the quality, and again, the scalability of that market. And that is a place where, among many other things that have to underlie and support the operation of a market, measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification of credits becomes incredibly important. And I think that's, a big reason why technology can really support that is there is a lot out there to measure. There's a lot of world out there. We can't possibly measure each individual tree or even each individual power plant's emissions precisely ourselves, right? Like operating in that market. And so technology is a very important and necessary component to support that market, and particularly in the nature-based solutions space. We'll talk about that later, but yes.
Thank you very much, and very important, as you mentioned, we need this for integrity and scalability, so actually to address a specific market. And I want to address that because a lot of people focus on the technology itself, but actually it's the purpose of the technology what is important at the end. So please, Tyler, if you can explain us a little bit, why do you think it's important from your experience?
Yeah, thank you. I think I bring the project developer lens to this panel. So AgriCapture is developing rice methane projects across the globe. So we have projects in the US, Brazil, Argentina, India, Pakistan, and Indonesia as well. I'll give everybody your rice crash course in under 2 minutes, so you're about to be experts. Rice is grown flooded. Flooded fields produce methane emissions. There's ways to irrigate your fields such that you're not continuously flooding that rice field, and therefore the oxygen reintroduced to the soil environment reduces the methane emissions from that field. So to take it one step more simple, the name of the game and what we do is getting floods off of rice fields. And so the MRV component is essentially verifying that these fields are no longer being grown flooded. And therein lies kind of the technology opportunity, which is what is the most efficient, scalable, credible way to be able to verify that these practices are indeed happening, where they were previously growing conventionally flooded fields that were producing methane. They then switched, the farmers in this context, switched practices and improved irrigation practices such that alternate wetting and drying or furrow irrigation or some practice removed that continuous flood, and in doing so, achieve methane reductions. And so when I think of technology and how it relates to the rice sector, there's definitely the technology that's on the field, so that's primarily irrigation. So what is enabling the farmer to move water on and off the field such that they can produce a healthy crop without it being continuously flooded? But on the project developer side, and perhaps like more relevant to this panel, is what is the MRV technology that allows us to really produce a credible, we know that this ton of CO2 equivalent occurred on this field in the most scalable way possible. And in the US and in Latin America, remote sensing allows you to see, let's say in a furrow irrigated rice field, oh, I can see that there's tailwater on this field. I can see that the top 2/3 of the field are not inundated with water. I know what kind of production practice is happening on that field. I know the irrigated and flooded portion and the non-flooded portion. But what do you do in a smallholder context, let's say in India, where you're not dealing with 80-acre fields, you're dealing with half-acre fields or 1-acre fields, and you have monsoon season. And so what's the most robust MRV technology to be able to apply to that context? Phone, in-field, time-stamped, geotagged photos, right, as a bridge to a more scalable solution of remote sensing. But when we think about technology, it's the most efficient solution to be able to verify and quantify what's happening on the ground while still achieving the highest level of quality. But you can't jump ahead, right? And so in smallholder context, for example, needing to take photos of what's happening on the field, ideally for a training data set that allows remote sensing to navigate through very small fields with less frequent satellite data that can navigate monsoon season and things like that. We'd love to bridge a training data set that allows us to do remote sensing, but the reality is at that scale, remote sensing doesn't appear to be a viable solution for a really high quality credit. And so when we think of technology, like it's providing more scalability to the project, which allows us to bring down cost of credits, provide greater access to farmers, and ultimately we're making the project more scalable. We're also reducing the burden on our stakeholders, because farmers, we want to be focused on implementing irrigation practices and producing a healthy crop, not tracking a bunch of data in the field that's not akin to their traditional operations. And so for us, when we think about technology as a project developer, we're always looking for ways to drive greater methane emission reductions on the field, but also scale the evidence and the quantification in a way that's most cost effective, but still delivering a very high veracity of that data.
No, very cool. And yeah, from everything I understood, so you're controlling how much water is in the field, and then actually two very important challenges that he mentioned. First, that it has to be remote, because nobody's going to be, so normally those rice fields are not like next to where we live. And second, they can be small, like 1 acre, 2 acres, and until larger ones. So a very interesting challenge, and we will see later on the next question how you have managed those challenges. And let's go to Benoît. Please, Benoît, I know you have very good insights about the why and why this is important.
Thanks, Juan. I'm going to be bringing the financial lens to this. I'm coming from 10 years working in finance, credit, and retail banking before I joined Vera, where I worked for several years. We've got the project developer that's making this project and the carbon credits possible. We've got the measurement company, the technology provider that's helping with monitoring, reporting, and verification. Technology is helping us be able to answer the question, is this credit real? And the lens that I look at it as is from a capital markets perspective. How do we determine whether or not we can trade, that we hold legal title to these things, that we can settle these assets like you do in traditional, mature commodities markets? And I think technology has a role to play in that. Kind of paraphrasing a part of what Tyler was saying, technology is there to help make things better and easier. And when we look at some of the gaps that we have today, it's important that we're able to address some of these fundamental issues in order to see this market scale. I'm thinking of investment committees, whether we're talking about buyers, whether we're talking about asset managers. The end buyers and compliance teams, when the auditors come knocking, they want to be able to answer this question, is ownership of this asset defensible? And that's a different question than, is this measurement accurate? And technology plays a role in being able to help us build infrastructure to support those things. The general public and a lot of players in this ecosystem, they think about integrity, greenwashing, additionality, permanence, and those are definitely really important issues, and technology helps address several of those in a variety of different ways. We also need that data to connect to systems that financial and regulatory institutions can actually use. A perfectly measured credit that sits on a legacy registry is still not bankable. This is why you're seeing trillions and billions of dollars in pledges, and you're seeing like a very small fraction of that actually being transacted every year. As a result, with the current infrastructure as it stands, pledging is becoming more of an output instead of the input to these kinds of projects. And the infrastructure to convert those pledges into transactions is what's fundamentally missing, and I'm going to be bringing more of that financial market infrastructure lens and how technology can support that.
Thank you very much, Benoît, and actually very aligned with the session we just heard with Richard and Team Profeta, because the bank, at the end, to have a bankable asset is important so that we can actually keep this climate finance ongoing. So for the next question, I will address Christina and Tyler directly, specifically because as technology providers or project developers or technology providers for project developers, you might have encountered that the technology is there. There are a lot of technologies to implement, but there are also different challenges. Like, for example, the capability of the people on the field to really adopt those technologies, or the difference that, or the modifications that you will have to implement to the different processes, like the VVV process, the validation, the verification, they will have to be modified, or even the assurance process from a crediting program perspective, since these new technologies also enables more information or data or activities that can be quantified with different methodologies. So please, if you want to both tell us from your experience, like the barriers, like what you have learned, lessons learned. Of course, I believe a lot of project developers might be here, so they will be interested in learning how you implemented those and lessons learned. So please, let's start with Tyler this time.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's so context-based. So developing rice projects across multiple countries, it's very different developing a project in the US or Latin America than it is in smallholder context in Southeast Asia. And a concrete example I'll give is field boundaries, right? The starting piece of data that we need to be able to validate the credit occurred is where did it occur? So we're enrolling a farmer, we're training them on implementing a practice, but ultimately we need to verify that the practice occurred and quantify the outcome. And in doing that, we need to monitor a field. So the first question is, well, okay, well, where is that field that this farmer is enrolling? And in the US, Brazil, and Argentina, we have large farmers that have equipment where, for example, we have an API into John Deere Operations Center where they already have their field boundaries. They can click 3 buttons, and all of a sudden we have that shapefile in our data set, right? It's a very efficient way to be able to get the shapefile of the field that we're then monitoring. In a Southeast Asia or in Indian rice production, for example, there's typically not a shapefile that exists for these different fields. And so when we enroll a farmer, we actually have partners that are doing more of a belt and suspenders approach of, okay, we're enrolling this community of farmers, but we're actually creating a new asset for these farmers in the sense of we're drawing field boundaries around this field that otherwise probably didn't have a robust field boundary to begin. And now that more manual process of drawing that field boundary creates the baseline piece of data that we then use to both model emission reductions and also monitor that field. And so that's one where you have to understand, well, what capabilities exist in these contexts today and adapt your process based on that. And similarly, on the remote sensing side, when you're dealing with larger fields that don't have the same amount of cloud cover, remote sensing can be a viable solution, right? To use satellites and the types of technologies that y'all are developing. But if you're in a smallholder context, what is your best available technology solution to achieve the same veracity of data it may be more photo-based in-field evidence with an eye toward, okay, how can we take this corpus of data that we're building that's becoming training data essentially and making it more robust and scalable with time. And so much of how I think about technology in these different markets is what exists today, what are the capabilities on the ground, what is the infrastructure and the different tools, whether it's tractor data and things like that that exist, what can we leverage versus what do we need to create? And I think it's very different in the different geographies in which projects can exist. We try to not reinvent the wheel, but where a wheel needs to be created and one doesn't exist, then what is the most efficient way to create that wheel?
Cool. Actually, I have two questions for you specifically, since what you have told us. So I come from Colombia, and I have heard from many project developers different experiences with digital MRV. Two questions I have on that area. Like, do you have like a program to create capabilities? Like, how do you bring the knowledge to those people? Like, do you have some specific ways of bringing them the knowledge? Because they might not have even the knowledge to, okay, they are capable of taking a picture, whatever, but specific pictures from specific angles. Like, there are different needs that you have. That's the first one. And the second one is once you get the results, I also heard a lot from project developers like, yeah, but I have measured carbon my entire life and your measurements are not correct. Like, there are a lot of difference and maybe the accuracy. How do you like correlate the data, the field data that they have with your data? So happy to hear from that.
Yeah, to answer maybe the second part first, I think like there's always going to be a QA QC process based on the data that you receive. I think it would not behoove the market to just receive any data and then just run with it through project development, right? There has to be a check and balance to all of these different systems. I'm a firm believer in starting small and then scaling. Our first project in the United States, we took 2 rice fields through to issuance. We generated 72 credits because I didn't want to go enroll a bunch of farmers for a process that I hadn't proven out, going end-to-end to credit generation, selling credits, bring a $30 check back to a farmer just to make sure I had done the end-to-end process before we then began enrolling much more farmers, because we didn't want to burn farmers. And we tend to do things that don't scale because we know the right way to do things and then can build efficiencies and scalability into that. For example, if we had a bunch of bad photos because we enrolled, 1 million acres in the first year, well, how do you really know that they're bad photos unless you've seen good photos or good data? And so being able to parse through, okay, we know what to expect, we know the data we expect to see, so now as we expand, we have something to compare it against. Remind me the first half of your question.
The first part was about how to give them capacity building process,
Yes.
like how to bring them the technology.
Yeah, I think in general, like for the farmers, we're not trying to bring them MRV requirements or capacity, right? Like we want farmers to focus on the actual crux of what we're doing, which is improved irrigation systems that are reducing methane emissions. And so when we are working with the farmers, it's bringing them the agronomic capacity, right? Like positioning them with the right resources, typically a neighboring field that farmers can come to field days, see how the practice is implemented, having local agronomists there to be able to support farmers. That's where we want the farmers to focus, is how do I implement this successfully, still have a strong yield on my rice crop, and be able to achieve methane and water reductions while still benefiting my holistic operation. And then separate to that, on the technology capacity building, that's where we're working with either typically a farmer. The farmer is kind of like, I would say more like a coach. And every year you're putting together your team, right? You have your field agronomist, you have your input provider, you have your seed provider, and each year you make decisions of, okay, who's going to be on this team that's going to be helping me produce this crop this year. And so we typically try to work with the people around the farmer to say, hey, you typically go out and are the crop scout that checks on the field to make sure that there's water on the field, you're not getting too much weed pressure, et cetera. that's the person that we want to train with a new mobile app that says, hey, you use an Android in your country typically, you have a mobile application. This is how we want you to take a photo, because you already go out and check this farmer's field for, whatever crop scouting or things that you typically do. Now we're equipping you with technology and training you to do this on the farmer's behalf so that the farmer can really focus on the implementation of the irrigation practices. And so in those ways, it's also optimizing who is doing the work and not making sure that it's overburdened on the wrong stakeholder.
Thank you very much. And now let's go to Christina. Please also explain to us what 3D SAR technology is. I don't know, raise hands, everyone that understands 3D SAR technology, what it means. I believe nobody understands that. So
Yeah,
please, Christina.
excellent. Yeah, I was going to back up and do that. So I will definitely go over that. And I think, first I want to say that, I want to acknowledge your original question. You could have the best data in the world, right? But if nobody can use it, then it is useless, right? And so I think, what we expect, the data that we expect at GeoOptics to bring to market, and I say expect to bring to market because I should clarify that we're pre-launch, all right, for pilot data. So GeoOptics is a spin-out of the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, was in the weather business, and will still be in the weather business, launching its own satellites and using that technology for high accuracy weather data. And the new technology that's being developed, built on some of that, is for synthetic aperture radar. So radar, everybody's familiar with the concept of radar signals, right? They shoot out and they bounce off of something, right? And these are pretty big wavelength signals. So synthetic aperture radar is essentially something that rather than, let's say, you have one object on the ground, you're bouncing the signal out and measuring the time to come back, you're actually simulating, you're making an image by passing that radar signal in a path and getting multiple signals so that you're simulating an actual aperture, an image on the ground. So it's not optical imagery. You're creating an image from radar signals and measuring returns of those signals off of the objects that they're bouncing off of. 3D, we all know what that is, right? So let's just say, imagine that you could have a 3D structural image of objects on the Earth's surface, like a forest or a lake or a pond, okay, at high resolution, 1, 3, 5 meters of horizontal resolution across, right, and maybe in sub-meter resolution in terms of height. So let's say we're talking about a hectare of forest, and we can measure that within a 1 to 3 meter accuracy across and 50 centimeters to 10 centimeters in height. That would give you a pretty powerful grasp on the amount of above ground biomass and thus carbon in that forest. And let's say that you could do that at roughly 90% cost reduction to what a typical project is spending on MRV right now. By the way, Tyler, you and I should talk. That would be incredibly powerful data, but this is a new data type, right? Not everybody is ready to deal with raw SAR data. And I mean, that's actually part of the reason that we're out here talking right now, because I think before we even collect that pilot data, it's really, really important for us to be engaging in the market and with stakeholders in the market, because as I said, the best data in the world is useless if you can't use it, right? And so while this data could be incredibly powerful, we very much are looking to partner with folks who are collecting data in other ways. It's not only for that validation. It's not only to validate that pilot data as it comes in, which we hope will be the end of next year, but also to understand the needs of the different stakeholders in the market, from standards setters, right, who build often those standards around what is the available and affordable technology that's out there so that we can actually have a market. From the project developers, from verifiers, auditors, and also from the buyers who want to know, as Benoît said, the big question that is this credit real, right? And so engaging, I'm a personal believer there's no shortcut to doing the work, to engaging with the people who are going to use and buy that data, to really understand not only how good is the data and prove out your technology, but also where are the problems, where are the gaps, what are the needs? Project development for forest carbon projects or blue carbon projects happens in all kinds of different contexts across the globe. And there are different levels of capacity and expertise to even deal with remote sensing data, never mind a new data type. SAR data is not new. It's already out there. At the resolution that we're talking about, it's often only used in defense applications because that imagery is so incredibly expensive, it's really out of reach for this market. What we're aiming to do is make it well within reach for this market and lower barriers of entry for more projects to come in the market, more efforts to come into the market, as well as helping assure buyers and other participants in the market of the quality of the measurements that we are making. So I think, again, it's working directly with all those different actors in the market to understand the needs and moving down the value chain from just data into the types of products that are usable by actors across the spectrum so that we get to the point of having the app, right, where you can, put in, a few of your, requirements and you can actually, download the data that you want and see, have images available that you can actually share. Not SAR images, those are not the easiest thing to see, but to get down to the point where we can make that data really accessible and usable for all kinds of actors in the market. So we are looking for those partners, folks who have been engaging here. There will never be a total replacement for ground-based data at some intervals, but what we're hoping to do is then bring down the cost that is such a major barrier, particularly in nature-based projects, to a level that can really unlock a lot of the potential, particularly in nature-based solutions and carbon markets. Did I fully answer the question?
Yes, and,
Okay.
And I actually, while I was hearing you, I got curious about experiences I have had with VVVs and people on the ground. If maybe you have discussed with them, because I always picture like a VVV, like an Indiana Jones person that likes to go on an airplane, then by bus, then by horse, and then go to a remote part on the world, measure the diameter of the tree, then measure the height, and do that many times, and walk around the forest. Have you talked to some VVVs and maybe asked them how they will correlate, because they will have to change their operating mechanism to see it actually on a desk and rely on the satellite imagery.
So I think the question is just generally too, like about adoption, right? And again, I think the standards is a really critical point, right? I mean, right now a lot of different standards do allow remote sensing, but you have to demonstrate how it is that you're arriving to your number, right? And so a lot of it is really just a transparency around here is the way that we made these estimates, and they're all estimates, right? They're never actually measuring, and even if you were, there's error, right? Every tree in diameter at breast height. But here's how we're arriving at these numbers, right? Here is some ground-based data, or, I mean, depending on the tier, right, of data that you're using, you might actually use, some off-the-shelf estimates for a given carbon type. So how you go about validating that is going to depend very much on, what the requirements of the standard are, and you essentially presenting your calculations, right, to that verifier. So obviously, we you need to have folks be comfortable with and have it publicly, I think, available for review, like scientific rigor around how it is that you convert SAR data into biomass and carbon. But I think we can anticipate that that's with ground truth data when we get that pilot data, that should not be a barrier. In fact, if you are making direct measurements of forest height and you are making those, there's less, I don't want to say abstraction, fewer layers of inference, right? If you're making a direct measurement of height than you have in other types of remote sensing, right? Where maybe for optical imagery, you know that there's a forest there, but it's not possible to have that 3D imagery. So I think having that just be very transparent and proven out with ground data is the key to that adoption, and then actually making the data available in formats that lots of folks can use without having to be a SAR expert. Right?
I think the real world business case for, if Christina wanted to sell me her MRV, what I would say is, okay, here are 5,000 fields where we had soil moisture sensors, so we know exactly how much flood was in that field from 2023. We want you to apply this technology on these 5,000 fields. If Christina said, hey, I can't even describe what you're saying, 3D SAR data can tell you whether or not, we can see through clouds, we can see through what's happening, and we can see if there's a flood on that field or not. We would say, great, here's 5,000 fields where we knew exactly whether or not there was a flood on that field. Give us the results retroactively on those fields, and if it matches and it's correct, or 98% or whatever the quality standard we set, and then you can price it cheaper than the process it took us to do that, that's a deal, right? And so that's how we think about it. Yeah, so, and I think for project developer, it's really important that you have that data built with a really high degree of confidence, because otherwise you're flying blind when you're offered all these different toolkits, right? You need something where you can say, great, I'm very open to being faster, cheaper, better, but I need to be able to compare it against something that I know is right. And then if you can retroactively show me that, or show that on a go-forward basis, faster, cheaper, better, that's a done deal. And so that's how I think project developers think about it, or should be thinking about it at least. And I think that's where technology providers can really add value to projects. But all of that is a walk before you run. You have to have something to compare it against before you take that leap to the more efficient frontier of technology.
Thank you. And okay, now we have the data. We have collected every data that we need to assess the project. And I'm going to go to Benoît, given his experience at Vera and now from the financial sector. So now we have collected the data. How do we bring that data into the registries? How do we assess that data? And afterwards, what do we do with that data so that the financial sector really understands it and really, let's say, relies or trusts that information so that, finance can come?
Thanks, Juan. So, we've been working with the project developers, the MRV providers. We're in the fields, we're in the weeds, or the rice, I guess.
There's weeds, too.
At some point, there's a carbon credit that gets certified by the registry, and the registry is really layer 0. It's not the whole stack of infrastructure that we need to see in order for institutional capital to move into this market. Registries are certifying the asset. They're providing methodology approval, validation, verification, issuance. Without that, there's nothing to measure, title, or trade. But registries can't also provide custodian services. They can't be a settlement agent, and they're also not insuring those credits. So those functions need entities with appropriate regulation and capitalization. This is a foundation layer, registries, that we need to continue building on top of. And so 4 of those infrastructure layers that you've probably, you might have heard me talk about more than once in different forums, is starting with legal title. Who actually owns this credit in a way that's enforceable? A registry transfer entry is not the same thing as a legal instrument granting property rights. Registries are basically recording transactions, that something was issued and then something was transferred from one account to another account, or it was retired. An analogy to think about is, to relate to this perhaps a little bit more easily, is if you think about sports games. You bought a seat to go sit at the World Cup and watch this game. that's proof of a transaction. There's money that was paid for something that was there. But it's very different from owning the property or the deed or the title to that seat in that stadium. If that stadium goes bankrupt, you have no recourse. It's, this is like you don't have any proof that you actually own that chair, that seat. So, you could be trading seats that you have at the World Cup with different people, but you're still not actually, it's not the same thing as actually proving that you have legal title to that instrument. So the next layer is custody and settlement. So regulated entities that can hold, clear, and settle credits in a way that some regulated entities do in mature commodities markets is another really important layer. Third layer, thinking about data integrity and standardization, having structured, auditable data packages that are able to map to institutional due diligence requirements can create a very rapidly scalable process for investment committees to be able to approve investments or purchases of massive amounts of transactions. That's how you scale. It's not going to be by continuing to do these like one-off bespoke carbon market transactions that we see today and that we have been seeing for the last couple decades. And then lastly, commercial connectivity. It's really important that platforms that make credits visible, comparable, and tradable alongside other asset classes are integrated or made interoperable with the registries that exist there today. Another really important piece is that technology providers become exponentially more valuable when they connect to all of these pieces here. We're hearing from Tyler about how he's deploying technology to create a base layer of data for his project, which is helping inform his business decisions. You're having an MRV provider that's able to accelerate or make cheaper some of those processes for being able to measure, monitor, and report. When we have all of that's really helping with the quality and integrity piece. When we're able to match all of this with the layers that I was just describing, you start creating what really resembles mature commodities markets today, and that's something that we're aiming to bridge with different partners that are here today at this conference. And so this is going to be a really fundamental, like the next sort of market fork that we're going to see in this space, and it's really imperative for carbon projects to be thinking about the different technologies that are going to be used to build out those different infrastructure layers and how they're preparing themselves to work with those, because kind of this is another analogy, but thinking about how like CCP created sort of a market fork in one respect, this is going to be a whole nother one. When you're able to prove legal title, when you're able to have custody and settlement, you're going to have institutional capital at scale start moving into those projects at such a massive amount, the whole market's going to start shifting in that direction. And so you're going to want to make sure that your company, your projects, your technology are already starting to plan and position themselves for that, because the market's going to go where the money goes. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And I really like your view about the different infrastructure layers that are needed, especially because there are different stakeholders. At the end, the buyers do have different requirements than the VVV might have, and this information help both, but they have different requirements. Before I go to the last question, I would love to ask the audience, because I have seen very engaged people on our audience, if anyone has any questions, specific questions to any of the panelists, so that we don't leave this just a conversation between us. I don't know, please raise hands. There are two questions. Yes, please.
So it's kind of the dichotomy between Tyler and Christina. So Tyler's saying, you got to show me that your data is going to support what I've already measured, so I know your data is accurate. But Christina, how, from your standpoint, I don't want to call it offensive, but is that like, well, my data is accurate? Like, do you feel like if I'm moving forward, that I could come and get your data and feel confident? Clearly, there's got to be some ground truth in moving forward with just remote sensing within reason.
I think, as I said, I think ground validation is always going to be a necessary component, right? The question is, how much of it, like after you've, let's say, things change, right, on the Earth's surface. So I think, after you've established that, okay, this data, we understand that this data is highly accurate, we know how to use and process this data and apply it, and use it in this application, and we can show you what the level of uncertainty is, right? And that becomes a trusted data source. I think you're always going to still want to do ground validation to make sure that everything's still right? I mean, and I don't foresee a future where we're just purely, monitoring all forests from space, and there's no need for anything to occur on the ground. First of all, carbon projects, and particularly forest carbon projects, do need many other kinds of interventions and presence on the ground, right? For the other, there's a lot that goes beyond just measurement of the forest from space involved in a carbon project, right? There should be communities involved. There should be I don't want to say government involved, but there's, that all fits within a policy and a legal context, right? So, but no, I think it's really important to have that level of validation. I mean, obviously, even in ground data, depending on what kind of measurement at what scale you're estimating at, has some certain level of error, right? Because you don't measure, you're sampling, you don't measure every single tree. But I think it's really, really important to have that validation to be able to show it, right? I think something that's just a little bit different from what we're proposing here than some of the current digital MRV methods, which are amazing and have used the power of AI and machine learning to use the available data from varied data sets to try to impute and fill in gaps where we simply don't have data, right? That can be very complex and somewhat removed, right? When you have LiDAR data and SAR data and optical data and data at different resolutions, and you're using the power of machine learning to take all these different data sources and come up with hopefully very accurate representations of what is in the places that we can't actually see or directly measure. I think the real promise and exciting part of the SAR, which, because it's radar data, it doesn't matter if it's day or night, it doesn't matter if it's cloudy, right? And because you're doing it from space, you don't have to fly a drone or an airplane, right, through a storm in order to collect that data, is that we will have a lot more data in the places that we currently can't see, but we're always still going to need to have some, level of ground truthing before, during and periodically. The point is that we can really decrease the cost burden, the resource burden in general of collecting that data, pre-project, assessments of, potential sites, things like that, where it's a very high volume. I think there was a review paper from 2021 that said something like, forest, the measurement, reporting, verification costs for forest projects can be anywhere from 50% to 270% of the ultimate project revenue, right? So that is a really expensive component and a market barrier, and hopefully we can bring that cost down. It doesn't mean that it fully eliminates the need for ground truth. And
I'll just clarify my point is that I love creative destruction. I think it's a great market force, right? And so we don't want to just stick with our process today and do it forever. But if we switch to a remote sensing solution before it's ready, we're not going to last very long in this industry because all of a sudden our credits are not going to be up to scrutiny, right? And so in the same way, though, if there is a MRV solution that is significantly faster, better, and cheaper, and they can be proved as such, and we don't move to that better MRV system, we also won't be in this industry very long because we have an uncompetitively priced credit. And so it's just that stage gating that and comparing it against existing systems so that you're not doing it before it's ready and having a low quality credit, and not doing it too late such that you're doing inefficient methods to achieve what can be done better through technology.
If I may, you're addressing a point that I hear a lot from project developers. At the end, project developers do have a lot of information. And for example, some of them ask me, okay, if I'm going to give all this data to parameterize at the end, yet the different MRV solutions, what is my gain on this business? If I were a project developer, you are sitting actually on a mine of data, very interesting one that could benefit any MRV, let's say, calibration tool. and you could actually open a side business, actually helping those MRVs implement one. And everywhere is different. So actually, if you ask the SAR technology in the Amazon forest, you cannot take a picture of the Amazon forest because it's always cloudy. You only take it in dry season, and in dry season, then you have different volumes of everything. So and everywhere is different. So actually, if you're a project developer and you really know your data, you actually are sitting on a gold mine of information that could benefit, and you can have a side business. We had also another question on the back. Please.
Radiometric correction. I think very different application of different algorithms can produce entirely different results, whether it's lab or sensor. And the same goes for the selection of different image pairings that project developers might do with radiometric corrections. And I'm just wondering, have you felt any appetite for a kind of bare minimum or introducing a kind of standard that we all need to meet among the registries, among these new markets, that VDPs can look at, that project developers can look at and say, yes, we've done that yet. Because that just seems like a wild space still today.
I don't know if I have a great answer for that, other than that the market ultimately determines the quality measures, right? And I think what we're seeing in the market today is that writ large, there needs to be a level up in terms of quality, and I think projects are responding to that, registries are responding to that, VVBs are responding to that. Defining that is somewhat challenging, but I think as a project developer, it would behoove project developers to err on the side of quality, and if you've overdone it, it's easier to walk back to a more cost competitive, scalable structure than it is to go back and say, I've really missed the mark. I've over-indexed on scalability, and now I lack the quality. And so one is easier to solve for down the road than the other, acknowledging that creates a more challenging, cost structure in the interim. But I think the market is really sending a strong signal to the industry that, hey, we need to really advance quality. We need to work towards long-term, costs coming down. There's a lot of great MRV tools trying to help achieve that long-term. But I think the short-term is very much err on the side of robust data and quality and seek long-term solutions through technology to bring that cost down over time. But to your point, defining it is challenging. I think the market, I see, a methodology is one way to do that, where they define all the quality criteria. Now I'm seeing more buyers also put out, here's our quality criteria that may even be over and above methodology, and those signals are actually really helpful to the industry.
So if I may, I'm not a satellite imagery expert, but what I have seen some crediting programs doing, it's more on the idea of creating some, let's say, guidelines or methodologies to specific measurement systems that actually address the coordinate system, the different satellites that you can take images from, and then guide you. If you use this, then the quantification should look like this, and then if you use this other path, then the quantification should look like this. But to be honest, we are toddlers in that space, I would say. So actually, maybe with your question, you have more knowledge than we here. I don't know if anybody wants to add something.
Yeah, I think the key is, can you demonstrate what your level of uncertainty against the ground truth is, and can you demonstrate that transparently, and can you reproduce that over and over again? And then, like Tyler said, the market decides what's good enough, right? The standards obviously have criteria, and there's discounting for uncertainty as well as all the other things that they discount credits for. But in terms of what's better, less uncertainty, right? Lowering that uncertainty level in terms of your quantification against the best available data, which not all ground data might be the best available data, right? In many cases, LiDAR provides really high resolution data, which would be a good truth against, other data types as well, right? And we only know that probably because of extensive sampling of, LiDAR against ground sampled data. LiDAR is, has to be deployed in ways that aren't necessarily, they're not weatherproof and they're, not always cost effective at every scale, so. But yeah, better is better, and I think, what is your level of uncertainty or your level of error against the best available data?
Okay, so we only have 2 minutes, so yeah, last question.
I wanted to ask, and also maybe Benoît, what do you see going forward? What tools do you see for the ESCO part that you mentioned, or what things that I don't know, artificial intelligence or whatever is coming into the future? What do you think is going to be adopted, or what do you think is going to be the future of these technologies? How do you see they're moving into, I don't know, a year, 5 years, or what do you see on the financial part?
Without naming specific companies or products, I'm just going to share that I'm really an advocate of not reinventing the wheel. There's lots of really great examples of what it works in adjacent mature commodities markets, and I think just by mimicking a lot of the same exact structures and building those here, it's going to be a great way for us to be able to quickly plug into institutional capital because they're already speaking those languages, all the infrastructure, regulatory, like there's a lot of alignment that we can just plug into if we work on building analogous infrastructure. So yeah, that's there are lots of parties in this market that are starting to pay attention to some of these problems, and there's a really big question of who's building which layer, how are these going to be interoperable, and are the solutions that are being designed, are these going to be fit for purpose? It's really easy to build kind of almost riffing off of your, excellent data. If it's, if you can't use it, it's useless. There's really great solutions sometimes that get built, but they don't get adopted by the market for various reasons. And so it's really important to be thinking about the adoption chain, the supporting ecosystem, and that these things are built and rolled out in a very deliberate manner. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. With that, we have come to a conclusion of our panel. I will ask you please to give a round of applause to our panelists. And thank you very much for hearing us this hour.